Hi, everybody. If we could get everybody back inside for our next panel. This next company is Nabis Distribution. They sponsor the panel. And really, what's important here is you can have the best quality product, the greatest packaging. You've spent thousands of dollars creating your brand, and you've got all this lined up, but you don't have your product on the shelf. That's a big problem, and it's starting to get really very interesting now because you've got some dispensaries wanting to charge shelf fees, and then you've got the issue of trying to get them to all the different dispensaries, and of course making sure you're getting it to a licensed dispensary. So there's so many things that go into it, and I think that this panel is really the nuts and bolts of it. Again, you're only as good as the consumers purchasing your product, and if you can't get it on the shelf and in front of them to buy it, then you've really got a problem. So I'm real excited to hear from these guys. I think it's, listen, distribution is probably the most unsexy thing about the cannabis industry, but it's probably the most important ingredient that you'll need. And so I'd like to welcome my panelists out here. The moderator is Michael Miller from LA Weekly. And Michael has been covering the cannabis industry. He's well versed in it. He's going to introduce the panel to you. And thank you, Michael. He just flew in from Israel yesterday, so I really appreciate him, powering through the jet lag to be here. Thanks, Michael.
My pleasure. Thank you. So thanks for that indemnity, because I'm a little jet lagged. That's right. But it's a cannabis event, so nobody will know the difference if I make a couple of mistakes today. So today we're talking about a subject that usually keeps everybody up at night. They're so excited to talk about it, and that's distribution. That is generally not a topic that everybody wants to talk about, but in California especially, it's one of the most important subjects and most important verticals in the space for multiple reasons, and we're going to try to cover those today. First, I'd like to have everybody state your name, your purpose, your rank and serial number, and give about a minute introduction about yourself, and then we'll move forward into our first subject.
Thanks, Michael. My name is Vince Ning. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Nabis Distribution. We're one of the largest cannabis distributors in the state of California. Everything we do is wrapped up in our tech platform that helps us, scale our business to California and eventually beyond, nationwide, internationally. I guess personally, my background is in the tech industry, and that was something that I wanted to help come into the cannabis industry as it was so new and nascent, to help scale the industry at large. Be able to give brands and other parties better choice and access to cannabis products, and education on top of it. Nabis Distribution. There you go.
Hey, thanks, Michael, for having us here today.
Pleasure.
My name is Jun. I'm president and co-founder with Vince at Nabis. Vince actually and I go back to when we were 13 years old. We grew up together in Virginia. And we started out the business in the back of our trunk, driving products around in duffel bags into parking lots and whatnot. And it's amazing to see how the industry has scaled and matured over the past 2 years. And I think Vince touched on that, but we really believe in giving every product a fair chance at reaching the consumer, and ultimately the consumers will decide what the best product is.
My name is Ryan Burke. I'm the SVP of Sales and Biz Dev at Ember Valley. Before Ember Valley, I was with Dope Magazine, recently acquired by High Times. After that, I was head of sales over at Suniva, publicly traded Canadian company. Ember Valley is founded based off of cultivation, but we're quickly turning into a vertically integrated cannabis product company. We use Nabis for logistics. Right now, where we stand, we hit market in March of this year. We've quickly made our way into over 180 doors. We're hoping to continue that with, introducing new product segments, and happy to be here.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Casey Lee. I am with the Bloom brand. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer. For those of you that don't know, Bloom has been one of the leading, or hopefully leading, vape products on the market here in California. We've been on the market now for about 5 years. I think we are probably one of the largest privately held multi-state operators in terms of vape distribution and vape brands. So right now we're distributed in California, in Nevada, in Washington, and New Mexico. And next year we're looking to expand our footprint and our presence probably into Oklahoma, Massachusetts, and Canada. So we're looking to kind of move quickly here. And we also use Nabis as a distribution partner.
Thank you. I'm Liz Conway. I'm with Surterra, and I've been in cannabis for about 6 years coming out of healthcare technology. Surterra is a national, soon-to-be worldwide brand, and as we entered the California market, coming from fully verticalized markets like Florida and Massachusetts, we were looking for a partner such as Nabis to really help us with the integrity, the tracking that we're used to in a fully vertical market. So it made sense. We also are working with Nabis for distribution of our products in California.
Thanks so much, Liz. So we're very fortunate because it's rare that you get both the distributor and the brands together, so this should be a very interesting dialogue between the synergistic relationship between a major material functionary component and the brands who work with the distributor themselves. It has to be a very important partnership. We're going to cover a number of different topics today, including the supply chain web, the legal requirements, the technology, logistics, and where we are going in the future with respect to distribution. So let's start with number one, and I'll turn to Nabis first to get your feelings about this. Basically, distribution is moving something from point A to point B. Not an extraordinarily exciting thing. Having just returned from the Panama Canal, I'm extraordinarily excited about it because I've never really understood the degree of logistics and how important they are to move everything into our homes for everything we eat and wear and affects our lives daily. What is the rationale to require a third party between an actual manufacturer and a retailer?
Yeah, so I think a lot of this is kind of follows a lot of the model of a regulated industry where having a three-tier system with manufacturer, distributor in the center, which is a third party, and then the retailer is required just because I think a lot of times the state or whatever the enforcing agency really likes to hold one party accountable for a lot of compliance and regulatory matters. So apart from the kind of the core business operating side of things of getting something from point A to point B, there's a lot of extra steps that happen in between, such as track and trace, testing, also excise tax and cultivation tax collection, and so everything from operating procedures and fiscal responsibility all falls under the distributor, and that makes it much cleaner for the state government, for instance in California, to be able to hold one party accountable for anything any sort of mishaps before products end up reaching the retail market. So a lot of it is for safety, security, and just making sure that products when they hit the retail market are what they say they are. I think for us that was something that it's easier said than done to get from products from point A to point B, particularly when this industry is rising so rapidly and exponentially growing, there's huge headaches to getting products from point A to point B, and a lot of times for a brand to do it themselves individually is not the easiest thing, and we do it each and every day, and we gain economies of scale by doing so.
Yeah, I think Vince touched upon kind of 2 points. One is an economic reason for why distribution exists, and the other is regulatory. To start with regulatory, I think cannabis kind of adopted California adopted a similar model that alcohol and tobacco kind of supply chain is set up, and I think there's kind of a ethical reason why they do this is essentially recognizing that cannabis is a vice. I think the government kind of wants to have some sort of degree of separation between the producers and the actual consumers, and that kind of and there's also the ease of regulatory compliance and things like that. On an economic scale, if you really think about it, currently Nabis represents about 70 different brands, 4,000 different SKUs, and we deliver them to about 700 retailers in the state. So if you kind of think about the complexity of that, if every single brand were to self-distribute or to ship their own products, it's really kind of a factorial problem where you're trying to connect hundreds of nodes to thousands of nodes. So really, we introduced that kind of economies of scale and efficiency to the system that is not only required by regulation, but it's almost something that naturally emerges. And even in states that are vertically integrated, I do believe that eventually the industry will trend towards third-party distribution because it is a natural monopoly that gains economies of scale. Trucking is a pretty simple business. The more you ship, the cheaper you can ship it with. So eventually, the beneficiary of all this is a consumer that doesn't take on the extra overhead cost.
Thanks so much. Let's hear now from the brands, Ryan, Casey, and Liz. Having a distributor, is that something that allows you to eliminate most of the headaches in the business and sleep sounder at night? Or are there also downside in having a third party being an intermediary to get to the retail chain? Liz, why don't you start?
Sure. Since we run distribution functions ourselves, I know how nice it is to have someone else run that function in a fully verticalized market. You're trying to specialize in everything, which is never an efficiency. And so to be able to turn it over to someone with whom you're not in competition from a brand perspective, someone who truly specializes in it, and also someone who's using technology to do it rather than a lot of paper manifests going in everywhere. From our perspective, it's great.
Casey?
Yeah, my sentiments are very similar to Liz's in the fact that we're running a hybrid model right now. So part of the distribution is handled by ourselves, and then Nabis helps fill in the gaps for us. I'll say that probably within our first year in the rec market doing our distribution, I'm pretty sure we totaled 3 Sprinter vans probably in our first year. So I think not having to deal with that already is worth going to a distributor, right? So on top of that, also like kind of just logistically, as things progress and as they scale, it'll make more and more sense for us to just go with them, right? Because they are going to be able to scale those economies faster than we will internally. So, I think right now for us, we're just analyzing based on the costs where it makes sense for them to apply. And my thesis is basically that over time, their costs are going to beat ours, and they're going to take more and more of our distribution.
Thank you. Casey?
So yeah, when we originally came into the market and we were designing our business earlier this year with our go-to-market strategy, we were of the view that if we control sales and marketing internally, and use a third-party logistics partner for our distribution needs, then we could have a little bit better of a control grasp on the relationship building within the space, which it is still very much controlled by relationships. So if you're a successful brand, having those strong relationships is at the top of the list if you want to make it. Now, if you have a great product and great packaging and all of this stuff, it's enough to get you on shelves, right? But as far as sell-through, there needs to be more than that. So, taking the logistics side off of our plate and, utilizing a professional service such as Nabis has left us with the bandwidth, let's call it, to actually go out and bear hug these relationships and build up these account growth so that, we're not worried about the day-to-day logistics of getting the product from point A to point Z. Now, there are also, in the state of California, it's no secret to those who know this space, even just a little, that, it's problematic, right? There's things that pop up left and right with the BCC. That being said, if you have full control over the logistics standpoint, it is the linchpin of any organization that's going to be around in, let's call it 5-10 years, let alone next year.
Thank you very much. That helps clear up a lot. Let's move now into the least compelling subject, but probably the most important, and that's the law. We have state regulations, we have county regulations, we have city regulations. What is it like for you, Nabis, to have to maneuver through that regulatory framework and pay those legal bills? Do you see it is overregulated as far as this vertical? Do you think the state has done a good job, or do you think it has done an overreaching job in the space?
Yeah, I mean, I would say on a state level, it's a pretty thin layer right now. They kind of defer to, as far as licensing goes and general practices, they basically defer to a lot of municipalities for certain things around like taxes, operating procedures, and certain inspections and things like that for our licensing needs. That definitely does create a lot of headache. For instance, here in LA, it's just really tough to get a cannabis distribution license, for purpose of our business. And so, we have to kind of figure out creative ways to work around it, so that we can still have that statewide scale and reach that is, abstracted to the brands that we work with, so that they don't have to worry about it. For us, like to your point, we have 3 legal teams that work for us, and it's not cheap. And they each kind of solve a different layer of the process, from cannabis compliance to cannabis compliance on the operating side of things with our commercial contracts, for instance, to employment rules and regulations in specific to this industry. One of the things, for instance, is we have to hire all of our delivery drivers on a W-2 instead of 1099, as what traditionally like Uber and Lyft can do. And it creates a lot of different complexities in this industry, and different, I guess, municipalities create even an additional layer of that sort of complexity in the cannabis industry.
I think when we're talking about the Bureau of Cannabis Control's kind of performance, it's impossible to talk about it without recognizing the black market and kind of the gray market that existed before 2018. And I think a lot of people kind of like to point fingers at the BCC and say, hey, they screwed with the market and so on. But I think what's really important to understand is that the complexity of moving a $2 billion black market into a white market is extremely high. And I think it's fair to say that the BCC and the California state has done a fairly good job at making this transition as smooth as possible. With that being said, there are definitely some issues, specifically with metric and track and trace. There's a lot of assumptions that these regulators made about the industry that isn't holding true every day, that which causes a lot of headaches for the operators in the space. But I do think that the regulators are well-intentioned, and they're trying their best to really make this work. I do want to touch upon banking as a potential problem. I think we talk a lot about compliance and following laws in accordance with the BCC, but we're also not really given the tools to follow the laws correctly. For example, we pay all of our, I would say 90% of our business transactions are done in cash, and we keep them in cash because there's not a federal bank or a state chartered bank that's willing to bank with us at scale. And if you talk about our volume, we're processing about $60 million worth of products every single year, and that's $60 million in cash that we count and pay taxes in. And I think that's just given added a lot more overhead to our operation and costs.
Thank you. Now from the brand side, Ember, Bloom, and Surterra. Tell us some about the challenges or not that you've had with the laws as they stand with respect to distribution. Is it your impression that they're overreaching with respect to a brand, or do you feel that it's been reasonable? Give it a shot, Liz.
Well, I'll say, having put in a number of license applications, that the distributor license and area was the least intrusive, the easiest to get, and but that created a lot of gray area because I think they may have seen distribution as an afterthought. Honestly, I like the way it's crafted, but there's an awful lot of questions. So, in terms of the license types, you get a little bit of a pass that way, some loopholes. And in terms of the second part of your question, ask it again.
Are there things that keep you up at night with respect to the legal structure on the distribution front? Or do you believe that either the municipalities or the BCC has overreached with respect to its effect on you as a brand?
I don't think they've overreached from a distribution standpoint. I think that there's a lot of enforcement that still needs to be done. They still need to tick and tie how track and trace will work. But from a distribution standpoint, no, I think that we were in Sacramento when they were writing those rules, and much of what we asked for, from the ability to have electronic manifests, for example, like reasonable things in 2019, they said, oh, we get it. Yeah, we'll do that. The ability to deploy vans throughout the state, distributor transfers, like a lot of it they got, and they said, okay, we'll adjust this. So that's my perspective.
Great. Casey, how's it been for Bloom?
It's been actually okay. I think I've been pleasantly surprised as far as how they've done it, and kind of some things that are a little more loose on. And I think that's helped to benefit us. And really, like, I'm hoping that the rest of the manufacturing and the retail, they kind of look at what's been done on the distribution end and kind of model that, because having some flexibility is actually very helpful in terms of just facilitating sales and facilitating the industry. I think for working with the regulators, I think they have an incredibly tough job, and probably a very undermanned team. So I think that, given that, I think they've done a pretty admirable job. I'm sure there's a lot of little things like metric, excuse me, that they still need to work on. But realistically, as a brand, I don't think that's the bottleneck right now.
Thank you. Ryan?
So going back to our strategy, as I mentioned earlier, the licensing and the compliant aspects of distribution luckily doesn't fall on our shoulders at this point. As a brand, as cultivators, we have to deal with the BCC in other ways. And to Liz's point, that's distribution, we've found, is something where, at least from a licensing granting aspect, has been relatively digestible by a lot of groups. Now, that being said, we're also going to be going through a phase, just like alcohol, that will sort of weed out the smaller guys. I think more groups will start to consolidate, and we'll be dealing with a landscape that looks a little bit more condensed when it comes to the number of distributors out there. And I think that will in turn make the BCCs make their plate a little bit less daunting. But yeah, again, going back to this, it was of our view that with all of these moving parts that this industry has, distribution is very much its own business, and it's not our business. This is where we rely on groups like Nabis.
Sure, thank you. Let's move now into the transition from the old style of distribution. We've gotten a long way from the donkey and cart to presently where we are. You are both from the technology world. Let's talk about how technology has transformed distribution and what you can educate us about with respect to the evolution.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think kind of every, market goes through a lot of evolution, as you said. And so prior to, Prop 215, prior to basically the legalization of cannabis and kind of distribution as its own structured, having its own structured place in the supply chain, brands oftentimes basically did their own self-distribution. They're, prior to, us existing, you couldn't ship cannabis products with FedEx or DHL or any other sort of traditional carrier. And, based upon the fact that there was a lot of kind of gray area in the industry, you needed a lot of trust and relationships in your drivers. I mean, it's, as Ryan said, it is kind of like the linchpin of your business. Ultimately, it controls your revenue stream. And so at the end of the day, you trust only your friends and family to go do your deliveries. And, I think a lot of us have done deliveries ourselves, and it's not pretty, and it's very risky. And so, for us to be doing it, at large, what we're trying to do, again, is really to just scale the cannabis industry and let brands do what they do best. And for us, we want to consolidate as much as possible to give every brand that sort of fair choice and access to the retail market. And I think, as far as what we bring to the table on the technology side is, at a high level, is to really create the efficiencies in the system, not to have them be calling us back and forth to ask about where the products are, like where their money is, but more so also to be able to track this sort of information and be able to really start understanding where the market is headed and where it's going on a sort of a consolidated basis. And as a distributor, we really do gain economies of scale as we scale. And for us, there's a couple different types of distributors as well that I kind of want to touch on. I guess at large there's two. There's one that basically it takes a lot of equity or builds in-house brands, and so that's one type of distributor that builds like a portfolio of brands themselves. And then there's us who we are very much like a pure play third-party logistics company, and that has ultimately created a lot of, I guess like flow-through of brands like yourselves to join our platform because it doesn't create as much conflict of interest amongst the customers that we work with. Ultimately our ethos is to help the industry scale, and it basically creates a lot more of a more efficient and a lower cost way of consolidating the industry.
Thank you. Can you follow up on that? Is there anything else you can add to that,
Yeah.
Jun Lee?
Actually, just to add a little bit more on that, I think what really technology enables us to do is to really build allegiances and do distribution at scale that would handle hundreds of brands. I think consolidation has been kind of a topic that a lot of people talked about in 2018 and still to now. A lot of distributors kind of mimicked the behavior of tobacco and alcohol giants and decided that they're going to go after these brands through mergers and acquisitions as a way of consolidation. And I think in the past that was the most realistic and practical way of consolidating different players, but I think kind of our reliance on this self-service platform allows us to consolidate through diplomacy and technology without taking any equity interest or ownership in these brands. And as Vince mentioned, cannabis is a very innovative industry with new brands coming into the market every single day, and we really didn't want to preclude ourselves from potential innovative brands in the future by tying ourselves or kind of anchoring ourselves with a particular brand that's happened to be doing well at that time. And I think technology is just a kind of a key component of it that ties everything together.
Thank you. On the brand side, does technology only come from the distributor's standpoint, or are there things that you have in-house as the owner and creator of a brand where technology has assisted you in your relationship with your distributor?
Yeah, so I think that retail in the cannabis space is moving at such a hyper speed and fast forward, just as it did in the 80s and 90s, as far as the revolutionizing of the retail experience. That's coming with the acceleration of smarter operators in the space. So we're starting to see that the big guys, the MedMens of the world, the Harborsides, those groups are starting to adopt methods that are not necessarily new by any means in traditional industry when it comes to retail. What that means from the brand side is we need to keep up with just-in-time inventory requests, which is huge. So visibility into inventory is probably one of the biggest bottlenecks that most cannabis brands have. So implementing processes and working side by side with groups like Nabis who do frontier in tech is really what we're focused on now. Because as I said earlier, these retail groups are going to continue to consolidate and come under one roof. And if they don't, then the smaller guys will follow suit because that's how they are going to have to keep up.
Sure. Liz, does Surterra use some proprietary or off-the-shelf technology to assist it with its distribution methodologies?
Yeah, we built our own technology just because our markets in Florida and Massachusetts were so vast. Exactly. We have to keep track of a product that, down to the tiniest amount has a huge value. I would just pause and say that, a lot of folks didn't want to use technology because if you use technology and somebody comes in and raids your software system, they get an awful lot of information that nobody wants out there. And I really commend the companies that have sort of leapfrogged that and said, look, you have to go the other way, which is to create trust and transparency through the technology rather than continuing to operate on paper and through fear that somebody's going to subpoena this. Like, we all have invested in our own technology to create product, and similarly, we should have technology to track where this goes and how much and when.
Thank you. Casey, Bloom?
Yeah, I think the transition from medical to recreational was a big one for us just in the distribution side. I think before it was kind of a game of like, who do you trust? Where's the money going? Like, you're worrying and looking behind your back all the time, which is kind of not where you want to be, right? You really don't, that takes up most of your mind share. Now that we're in a recreational space and this can be done kind of, above the board, I think now we can look at data. And that's the key with the technology platforms is we're getting fed the data. So now we know we can kind of optimize and say, okay, where are the efficiencies, right? And that's what technology allows us to do, and I feel like, for us, that's been the biggest transition, is now I can sit there and not have to go through paper invoices, or like kind of the paper route for what happened. I can actually look at the platform or log into Nabis and say, hey, what have we done this week? What have we done this month? And optimize those routes.
Thank you. All right, let's move into sort of a day in the life of a distributor and a brand on the other side. I'm a hypothetical vape brand. I'm bringing in my parts from someplace in the Middle East, hopefully without lead, mercury, and vitamin E. I'm manufacturing my own oil. I'm assembling that all here somewhere downtown LA. And then I pick up the phone and I call my distributor. What happens next?
Actually, if you work with Nabis, you never pick up your phone. Anytime that you want the distributor or us, in this case, to do anything, we receive an order on our website. So essentially, Ryan, Liz, or Casey would log on to our site, say, hey, I want you to pick up X number of things from this location. And that automatically triggers a process within our, and Vince and I don't even know about it a lot of times. And we send the truck within 36 hours, we pick up the product and we bring it back to our warehouses, which basically provides centralized storage and dispatch for the entirety of the state.
And then what are you required to do pursuant to the BCC regulations once you've put it into your van, you've unloaded it at your warehouse? What happens then? What are you looking for when that product comes to you?
So the BCC requires that in any leg of transport, there's this document called a shipping manifest that delineates every content of the order. A lot of times, if it's to a retailer, it's required to have a certificate of analysis for the testing, as well as other tax obligations like cultivation tax or excise tax. What we kind of enable through technology is kind of we automate the generation of all these paperwork and remittance so that, to the brand, all they're saying is that, hey, pick up, 100 of X from point A and deliver it to point B. But all that kind of compliance and paperwork is generated automatically and submitted to the BCC.
And you also have a tax obtaining requirement, do you not? Which adds a tremendous amount of responsibility and potential liability for you.
Yes, absolutely.
Walk us through that.
Right. So there's two kind of taxes, cultivation tax, which kind of trickles up from upstream down to the distributor, and the excise tax, which trickles up from the consumer to the retailer to the distributor. And I would say that the vast majority of the burden is on the excise tax portion. So there's a 24%?
Yes.
24% on the wholesale value of the product. So essentially, every time we deliver a product, we collect the excise tax as well, a lot of time in cash, and then we bring it back to our facility for reconciliation.
Thank you. Brands, Casey, tell us your day in dealing with a distributor. Is it a fairly smooth process now with the technology systems that are in place? Do you have the typical occasional glitches that anyone has when looking at the hourglass spin?
Yeah, I think for distribution as like a brand owner, it's a good day if I don't have to hear about it, usually. When I hear about it, it's usually an issue, and it's usually something that's very pressing.
Sure.
I think for us, it's really just all about risk mitigation and making sure that we know what could go wrong so that we can prevent it ahead of time. And that's actually part of the reason why we're using Nabis, right? Because who knows, God forbid, our truck drives off the side of the road and can't deliver the orders that day, right? So that provides us with the options. And I think as a brand, if you design it properly, just by looking at what are all the things that could go wrong and design it against that, I think generally you're in a good place and you won't have to hear about distribution on a regular basis. And that's where we want to be.
Thank you. Liz?
Yeah, one of the things that distribution does for us is in a highly competitive market where taxes are so high and you're competing against the illicit market, so your margins are almost nothing. To have to go and get all of the labor that it would mean, and the trucks, et cetera, to add to your margin, if we can just turn it over, and then then they're using technology to expedite that even further. Like, it's a huge savings in a thin market environment.
on that note, what does distribution cost a brand on its bottom line on a percentage basis of a product?
I'll let the guys handle this.
Sure.
Yeah, so I mean, we charge a percentage basis of the wholesale value of the product, and
And
really,
is that legally mandated, or are you contractually allowed to?
Yeah.
Third-party negotiations, however.
Right. Yeah, that's totally.
Whoever has the leverage in a typical situation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's totally just between us as business partners. It's not. There's no sort of regulation around pricing there, and that kind of is a scaling model based upon how much volume you ship through our platform, and mainly because that aligns incentives correctly. Where if you ship more products through us as a distribution platform, we actually save money on a unit economic level as well, and so that helps our margins, and then it also helps them because we can give them better pricing on a lot of their shipping needs.
Can you give us a range of high and low?
Yeah, I mean, it basically goes up to double-digit percentages.
19 or 11?
I can't share that much. I'm under NDA a lot of situations. But yeah, ultimately, I would say on a kind of broad stroke level, it allows the brands to turn their CapEx expenses into more of like an OpEx expense. And it's something that is very scalable, that you can scale up and down, rather than having a bunch of trucks and warehouses sit on your balance sheet all the time that depreciate. It's something that they don't have to worry about. And based upon cannabis and how it is like a live plant, there is like shelf life, and there's also harvest seasons, and so seasonality also takes an effect when you have a lot of these like fluctuations in volume, and so using a third-party service like us, it helps with that. And for us, like, we really just require working with a lot more brands to be able to kind of smooth out a lot of the kind of imbalances from month to month.
Sure, thanks.
Yeah.
Jun Lee, you have something to add to that?
Yeah, just to kind of give a rough range, it can range anywhere from the high single digit to low teens. We've seen the distribution kind of pricing go down quite rapidly since the beginning. I'd say when we started out in 2018, it was common to ask for 20, sometimes even 30% if the distributors participating in the sales. But we've kind of seen, as we experience economies of scale, that shrink quite rapidly.
Is that marketplace pressure with other distributors to
Absolutely.
be competitive?
It's marketplace pressure. It's also a pressure from the consumers as well. Consumers going to the black market, and also just I would say, ultimately this service will become commoditized to a certain extent or another. In regular trucking industries like food and agriculture, 3% is usually the margin that a distributor takes. Given that this is a highly regulated good, I don't think that it's going to quite reach the 3% level, but I do think that it's going to trend down closer to that.
Sure, thank you. Ryan, you want to have something to add for Ember and distribution issues or positives on the day-to-day
Sure.
operating?
So we recently went through a distribution change, and that's pretty disruptive to any organization, especially one that's experiencing its best month of revenue that month. From a distribution standpoint, flooding these guys with a bunch of orders, the conversion rate is something that needs to be taken into account. Now that goes back into the the inventory aspects of everything and all of the different accoutrements that these retail groups expect from their brands and from their distributors. It's something that is highly volatile, and because it is a young industry, this the trend when it comes to change is one that's sometimes met with disappointment from retail groups. Now that goes back to having the control over the relationships, as we do as a brand, which is why we chose to incorporate a third-party logistics team, so that way we can go in and whatever needs to be fixed can be fixed very quickly. But yeah, from our standpoint as a brand, there's no blueprint to any of this, right? I can't pick up a book and say, hey, this is what this group did back in 1990, as I was telling you, Vince, because there's absolutely no way of doing that. So, it very much is an industry where you just have to roll with the punches. Luckily, we're with the best of the best.
Sure, thank you. All right, so in the final question, let's take a look at where we are. Let's presume we've gotten through our first year of adult use rec, so to speak. As you sit back and look back as we move into our second year of legal, what are some of the things that you're happy with, both from a brand side and from a distribution side, and what are a few things, if any, that you have consternation about, keep you up at night, or that you would simply like to be done better?
Yeah, I mean, I think for one, the industry has evolved so much from when Jun and I first started this company like 2 years ago. You know, I guess just like the quality, like the talent of people in this industry has changed so much. I mean, I think you know the people that sit on this stage kind of are fairly good representations of that, coming from various financial industries, other CPG industries, big conglomerates, coming into this industry with that sort of experience and corporate talent is something that really will transform and shape how this industry evolves into a mature one. That's something I'm like super happy about. Ultimately, I guess on the other side of things, one thing I'm not so happy about is I guess like the level of enforcement from the BCC. There's a lot of still like black market that we had touched upon earlier. That's roughly around 3 to 4 times the size of the legal rec market. That is both damaging to us as like legal business operators who choose to do this in a legal, regulated way, and it also hurts the consumers at the end of the day too, because they don't have compliantly tested products and safe products to be able to consume. And so, I think as far as enforcement goes, yeah, that's something I would like to see more, and ultimately what that translates into is conversion of the black market into the legal rec market.
Thank you. Jun?
Yeah, I think Vince touched upon it. I think people has been a big change. I think there was a lot of resources in branding, and marketing dollars that were spent in destigmatization of cannabis, and I think everyone in the industry is a kind of an indirect beneficiary of that. I think it's really opened up investors' minds into investing into the space and not considering this a high risk per se investment, as well as convincing people from more traditional educational background, from banking or consulting or finance, CPG, food, beverages. Bringing that talent in has really elevated the standards of the industry. The things that kind of keep me up at night, I mean, as a logistics provider, I mean, we briefly touched upon the fact that we're kind of like an insurance agency, a hedge. Basically, you bundle all your risk into kind of a small, to your distributor, pay a small fee. What that translates to us, though, is that we take on all the risks. So essentially, I'm worried about our drivers, falling off the side of the highway. I'm worried about our vehicles breaking down in the middle of the day. There's a lot of moving pieces that keep us up at night, but that's why there's a marketplace for it. Yeah.
Sure, thank you. Liz?
From a compliance perspective, it keeps me up at night that we only want to work with compliant businesses. It's one of the reasons that we really like Nabis, that they play by the book. I don't have any hesitation that when we make a decision that it is locked in from a legal and regulatory perspective. The thing that's been a great joy in coming to California, which is already pretty volatile, and looking at the past in California, a lot of decisions were made from an emotional standpoint. What do I think is going to happen? And now with the data that we're getting, we're able to make much more educated decisions. It helps to tamper down some of that volatility. So,
thank you. Casey?
Yeah. I think as cannabis entrepreneurs, none of us are getting too much sleep at night, probably.
You should try some good indica. I can recommend some.
Do you have any on you?
In the green room.
Yeah, I might be able to help you out.
Oh, I'm sure you would. No, I think in general, I think definitely positive that we're out in the open. I think just not having to look over my shoulder every 20 minutes, 30 minutes. I feel a lot of comfort there. Because I've been doing this about 5 years. We spent 4 years basically just trying to mitigate risk and trying to make sure we didn't get pulled over or this or that. And I think having that peace of mind frees up part of our mind share to be able to actually do business, which is what we want to do. And I think probably what needs to happen just as a brand is that there needs to be a lot more, I think, retail competition. I think there's definitely not enough retailers here in California to support the market. I mean, I think in medical you're looking at 3,000-4,000 retailers, right? And now we have 600 maybe. And that puts a lot of pressure on a brand because now the retailers are asking like, well, hey, listen, we want you guys to pay for the space or this and that, where I think that is kind of unfair to the competition in terms of products, because there might be some very good products that just aren't able to keep up with the big brands, and not having enough retailers kind of curtails that. It kind of slows things down, right? And I think what I would like to see over the next few years is just some more emphasis on the brands in terms of product quality, and not focusing on just branding just for branding, and allowing the competition to be there just in terms of letting the consumer speak for it.
Sure, thank you. Ryan?
So at the end of the day, consumers are going to drive the pattern of any industry, right? So I think what is required for the black market volume to turn down a little bit is the consumer education aspect. So, as a brand, it's our responsibility to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to deliver the best product to these people. Luckily, in the compliant markets, we're in probably the tightest regulated industry in the space, right? So, as a brand, what really drives us is the education aspect, and the fact that we're in the most sophisticated buying market in the country. So it's starting to trend in the manner that we're lucky enough to be positioned well in, because at the end of the day, quality of product will drive sales. And if you are able to rely on compliant distribution partners, you can make sure that you continue to stock these shelves with very, very complex retail groups, right? So the influx of new people into this space coming from traditional industry is awesome, but I think it's largely driven by the client demand.
Thank you. All right, well, I want to thank you all very much. We have some time for questions from the audience on distribution. Thank you. Deborah, do we have mics in the audience?
Yep, I'm going to bring a mic down now,
fantastic.
so I'm sure you guys have questions. Right there.
Hi, I'm Deborah Castillejo from Gold Leaf Limited. And I've heard a lot about transitioning from paper to technology. And so my question is, are you guys already thinking about how to use blockchain for supply chain, for transactions, and smart contracts?
Yeah, that was something we had thought about at first before we implemented any solution. I think that there's not enough, with any sort of blockchain technology, it really requires like a network effect in order for that system to work well. And for us, we didn't have that. And so actually, kind of how this business started was on the operational side. So Jun and I were delivering products ourselves back in mid 2017, and we really wanted to build up the actual business first before we applied various different tech tools around it, because we really needed those network effects and kind of the consolidated nature of distribution to exist before we could layer on something like blockchain on top of it. I think also it's hard because with cannabis being so regulated already, blockchain is in very similar form, also a very gray area type of market. And so to add put two fires together, you get a bonfire. And so it's not something that I think people have toyed with the idea, but it's not as practical right now, I'd say.
I am excited about potential use of blockchain in cannabis. If you think about metric and track and trace system, it's almost it's very analogous to the way blockchain is structured, and I think there's a lot of natural synergies there. I do think that before we get there, we should first start with credit cards and banking, and there's a lot of other fundamental things that are missing. But I do think that if Nabis will seize an opportunity to do that when the time is right.
Other question?
What's Nabis's minimum criteria to onboard new brands for logistic-only purposes?
At Nabis, we believe that every brand should have a fair chance, so everyone is welcome. And we work with brands that are doing several $1 million in revenue per month. We also work with mom and pop shops that do several thousand to tens of thousands. So really, there's no requirement, as long as you're compliant.
Yeah, not looking for a ton of detail, but what is your general philosophy about securing transport?
Security is something that we take very seriously. I would say though that the risk profile of transporting cannabis has significantly reduced since legalization, mostly because the products that we're moving are insured through cargo insurance. The products that we're storing are also insured through property insurance. So obviously something that we think about is not something that we worry about and keep us up at night every day. We do have armed guards on premise to guard the cash and the product. And for example, to comply with all the BCC regulations, all of our vehicles are equipped with GPS trackers, 360 cameras, as well as metal cages that lock the back of the cargo compartment. So it's something that we definitely spend a lot of mindshare and money on. Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Does Nabis hold the product for the brands on site, or when an order is processed and made, then Nabis comes, picks it up from the manufacturer or cultivator?
We warehouse it on site so that we guarantee 36-hour turnaround time in the entirety of the state.
How would you say companies, there's 100,000 companies in only 10,000 stores, there's only so much shelf space. How does that, the gridlock of that, trying to get in stores and or the transportation, how do we get past that or through that?
Yeah, so actually the CDA, California Distribution Association, is kind of pushing for a bill that would potentially make slotting fees prohibited in retailers. So I think that might be a step in the right direction for just making it a bit more of an egalitarian system. But as Ryan kind of touched up on it earlier, I do generally believe that good products still have, as much as it's an extremely competitive space, it's still very new and there's a lot of opportunities. And I see a lot of innovative brands that come in, penetrate the market. And I think it will be that case for quite some time.
Yeah, and I think in terms of a trend, there's going to be more and more retailers. It's kind of a slow trickle, but there will be more and more retailers because consumers just need more access points to cannabis products. And then as far as a distributor goes, there's going to be more and more consolidation. And so I think ultimately in the mature market, we kind of win much more leverage over a lot of these retailers. And as far as that goes, working with the best brands helps us get into more and more of those stores. So I think in terms of where we're positioned, it helps a lot with where we'll be at the end state.
I have a question. Do you foresee any kind of like superstore situation? Because I feel like when I go into dispensaries, and I go into a lot, that they have a very kind of narrow supply. And I think I've only been into one dispensary, and it was in Seattle, that had gobs of brands. It was a tiny store, but it was like a superstore. And I was so surprised that we don't see more superstores that just go, yeah, we'll have everyone in our store.
Yeah, so I can speak to that. Right now, because it's such a volatile space and a lot of these smaller retail groups only have so much bandwidth to carry a certain amount of SKUs, we're seeing that they're very selective with who they bring in. And that's mainly driven by consumer want. So when it comes to that superstore idea, we're starting to see it develop more and more. Groups like MedMen, for example, going back to them, they carry a bunch of SKUs. They give a lot of brands shots. And at the end of the day, the data doesn't lie. So what works will stay, what doesn't won't. Now, the components that go into making your brand work or stay are up and down, right? It changes month to month. And going back to the accessibility of information that consumers have, it makes it difficult. It makes it, you have to strategize with how you're going to get your message across, how you're going to get your brand to stick in the marketplace. So that comes back to, what you develop your resources into, such as brand ambassador programs and involving yourself with external events. And I'm sure Casey can touch on this as well because they've been in the market much longer than we have. But from what we've seen in 2019, we're seeing the trend start to go from, okay, the inside industry people are going to get the brands on the shelves what they want, to consumers are now driving that demand. So long story short, there's going to be more and more brands that rise to the surface. It's going to come down to those who have incredible product and most importantly, the bandwidth and the reach to supply the market.
To add a little more color to the gentleman's question earlier, I think we have a wide kind of range of different brands here. We have Bloom, which is a legacy brand that's been around for quite some time, very successfully. Ember Valley, that launched in April with $0 in revenue, who scaled it to an $800,000 a month type of revenue. And then we have Surterra kind of coming in from out of state, just about to launch in California. I'd love to ask you, Ryan, kind of how you took the approach to kind of scale your sales from essentially nothing to where you are today.
Sure, yeah, and there's no complex answer to give you when it comes to that. The ground game is the most important thing. This is very much an industry that operates off of face-to-face value. So, when developing something and developing the team, it's really important that you have a team that respects and understands the nature of relationships and is able to grow those in a very quick manner, because one day in this space is like 30 in any other. So, having the ability to, really wrap yourself around and become the main talking point within the organization, from bud tenders all the way to, dispensary owners, that's what's going to separate those who are going to make it and those who won't.
Thank you. Any more questions? You're there. Go ahead.
To speak to the last point, I think you might need more than one dispensary license to operate a huge space. So there's, I think, one in Las Vegas that is
Planet 13.
Planet 13, yeah. So they're using both of their dispensary permits for that one space. I guess my only other question was around the distribution licenses, and that's, do you need duplicates? Do you need a license, and does the distributor need a license?
Good question.
As far as California goes, we operate out of the same license. There's as we discussed earlier, it's easier to get than many other licenses, and also it's probably the most scalable. We can go anywhere across the state with just one license at one hub. It is tied to a specific address and location though, so everything does have to be stored there. So that's kind of like where some of the bottleneck happens. If we wanted to store something down in LA, we'd have to get another license down in LA.
So you're not allowed to have a secondary or ancillary location with the one license?
Exactly. Like product being stored overnight has to be in a licensed location and requires a separate distribution license, because you can't have one license be part of two addresses.
To clarify there, we use our primary license for our transferring, manifests and documents and things like that. But we also have a secondary location in LA, also with a separate license. So as you kind of scale to different geographies, it is necessary sometimes to have multiple licenses.
Great, thank you.
What roles do you put delivery service in? These parameters of what we're discussing, distribution and or delivery services. For like more shelf space, or is that an alternative to, let's say dispensaries are all filled up with shelf space, then people can go online to delivery services and have a wide range?
I'm not sure I understood the question.
I think what he was saying was, if they can't get it through the distribution channel to the dispensary, does that then push the customer to the ease delivery or whatever, to the online delivery, in order to get the product they want that's not on the shelf?
Yeah, I would say so. I think, we live in the 21st century. People are very used to the idea of Amazon Prime. I think very similar to that vein, people do look to ease and other delivery service providers to get the products that they want specifically. Because when you walk into a store, to Deborah's point, you don't always find what you want in the store. So I do think that the e-commerce side of that's going to continue to grow.
Can we clarify on that point, because I want to make sure everybody understands here. Ease is a technology platform.
Yes.
They are not a dispensary or a distributor.
That is
so
correct.
Let's talk about the reality of Ease. It's an online, right?
Right.
They connect to a consumer based upon their zip code. There is somebody driving around a moving dispensary with $2,500 worth of product in that car, and that consumer is seeing what is in that moving dispensary. But to get that product to that moving car into the dispensary, we needed a Nabis, did we not? I think that's what we need the audience to understand.
Yeah, so I mean, ease is kind of an interesting topic. I could probably talk about this for hours, but I think the reason why ease is set up the way it is 100% because of regulations, and also given kind of the LPA restrictions of their investors. Essentially, they kind of took this position of not be plant touching, and they work with about, I would say, 23 or 24 depots throughout the state to kind of facilitate their deliveries to a consumer. It doesn't really matter who actually is the entity that's delivering the product. So I think a lot of times I just kind of call out ease as synonymous to a delivery service, but you're correct that it's, there's a little bit of a distinction there.
Thank you.
You mentioned a sales component earlier. Do you have a separate sales division that's separate from your delivery or logistics division?
We do have a small sales team of actually only 4 people. It's something that we're experimenting with right now, but we generally are very careful about this because we don't want to be introducing any conflict of interest with the brands that we work with. So right now we're kind of handpicking about 5-6 brands that we're experimenting this with and leveraging our physical infrastructure to see if it makes sense to generate demand for them, but in a way that is supplemental. So we would never say we're going to do all your sales, but maybe we can get you into stores that you wouldn't normally reach.
Yeah, it's mainly to help with like new brands launch and get initial introductions into retailers, as well as helping existing brands get into more fringe areas of the state where, you know, their core sales team might not have enough reach or access to get into. And because we go to all these doors, it makes it very scalably easier to basically do, you know, marketing and sample drops and things like that over to bud tenders in those regions.
Hi. My partners and I recently acquired a micro business. We did that primarily to cultivate, manufacture, and distribute our own products through a network of retailers that we have relationships with. My question is, what are some of the challenges of distributing our own products in-house versus going with the 3PL like Nabis?
I think the challenge is definitely, there's about 700 retailers in the States, and you know, it depends on kind of what your goal is. If your goal is to kind of create a boutique product and have it shelved in a couple of stores that, you know, that you have relationships with, I think it's perfectly fine to self-distribute. But when you're talking about kind of scale, what if your retailer is in Los Angeles and you're located in Humboldt? It takes 12 hours to drive that product from, you know, that point to the other side. So I think while microbusiness provides you a lot of flexibility and freedom while, when you're starting out, but if you're really trying to scale your business, you should really think about how you can kind of take your product and distribute it effectively throughout the whole state.
On that note, can you articulate, because I think there probably is some confusion, is distribution not a requirement for a manufacturer? Can any brand simply choose not to under the BCC regulations?
Yes and no. So this is a very interesting topic. So when the 3-tier system was first implemented in California, they did want distribution companies to be a third-party entity that's separated. The California Manufacturers Association did lobby for an ability for the manufacturers to also have a distribution license, which went through. So now, as a manufacturer or as a cultivator, it is possible to have a distribution license. I believe that Bloom, you guys also have one, and I would say that a lot of the major brands have one. I'd love to kind of understand why, what the benefits are of having your own distribution license.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just comes from the history of distributing it ourselves to begin with, and we already had that. It was a necessary component because there wasn't people like Nabis when we started, right? So it was just something that we've already been doing. And luckily for us, you know, we've been doing it for a while. We were able to keep the costs down, and the overall percentage is fairly low. So it still does make sense in some cases. I would say though, if you're like, you know, starting a newer brand, that's probably not something you want to really focus on building. You learn a lot of hard lessons doing it yourself, and I think better to learn the lessons on the brand side and the product side than to learn it on the distribution side.
I would actually disagree, but I think that where I've seen someone have their own distribution license is just to move product between their own facilities, because that can get hugely expensive. You know, if you have your manufacturing facility here and your cultivation facility there, you use your own distribution license to move it back and forth. But there's absolutely no reason I can see then to move that product out into the market. That's where I would use a third-party distributor to do that. They're just efficiency, even with testing. You know, if you want to move it to your own distribution license, have it tested, and then move it into the sales channel, that's where it would go.
Right. Yeah. I mean, also now in the legal market, you know, it's just separate licenses you have to maintain. It's just extra headache on the operational side when I guess your job as a brand or a manufacturer is to do the best job that you can to sell your product and educate consumers about it. You know, it's not something you want to be spending your working capital on trucks and warehouses and things of that nature.
Great. Thank you so much. I want to thank the panel today, Ryan, Liz, and Casey, the brands Ember, Bloom, and Surterra, 3 terrific brands. And thank you so much, Nabis, for giving us a phenomenal walk down distribution lane and an education 101. Really appreciate it. Most importantly, I want to thank you, Deborah, for a fantastic conference. You did a great job, Green Market, and we look forward to having year 2 of the economics of cannabis brands with you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, everyone. I do have to let you know that, unfortunately, our athletes will not be coming here. Apparently, there was a miscommunication with their logistics person, so sadly, we will not hear from them. I apologize for that. Just don't know what to say about that, but things happen. And so, again, thank you, everyone, for coming. We really appreciate you being here. I hope you got a lot out of it. I feel like a lot of people did. And I, again, thank our panelists, our moderators. Again, thank you so much for everyone for coming. Thank you.
Yep.